Hello and welcome to Widemouth Books. My name is Antony Bruce and today I'm going to be reading the first chapter from my debut novel, Archie Widemouth, The Whispers of a King. This is a copy of the proof. It feels quite surreal actually, holding it in my hands. It's been a long time to get to this point. Probably taken me over 7 years, I think, in total. I have really enjoyed writing. I never saw myself as much of a writer, and I really just wrote for something to do one morning in the rainy UK. But that turned into 7 years later, turned into a book. So, as I said, I've really enjoyed the process, and it's helped me a lot. And I really just hope that people enjoy reading it. So, if you enjoy fantasy novels, stories of the underwater world or marine creatures and magic, there should be enough in this book for you, and you may well be in for a treat. I hope so. Now, as I said, I'm going to do a read of the first chapter, and you'll have to bear with me and my dulcet tones. I'm definitely not a professional actor or a storyteller. Miriam Margolyes, I am not. So be kind, and hopefully you can stick with me to the end of chapter 1. So without further ado, I shall get on with it. Chapter 1. Nico was hungry. He craved something, anything, to quench the thirst of his father's curse. He had spent a lifetime searching the deepest and darkest of oceans, through the iciest seas and murkiest trenches, but nothing could satisfy his burden. Tonight is the night, he thought. Nico was alone. The water was eerily still, and darkness had entombed him. At 3,000 metres below the ocean's surface, Benthia was as dark as the tortured eyes of an orphaned seal. No sunlight penetrated these depths. Like many others of his kind, Nico was born with the gift of seeing in the dark. Their large bulbous eyes had adapted to see with the tiny signals of light from bioluminescent bacteria, which illuminated the oceans like the stars in the sky. Nico was a Brighteye, and Brighteyes could see even in the deadliest shadows, fundamental in a world in which predators await. His eyes contained those very light-producing bacteria, and they shone with the brightest blue. Of all the blue hues imaginable in the ocean, the most chilling was locked in Nico's eyes. Nico swam slowly towards the distant mountain ranges of Benthia, enjoying the cold, oxygen-rich water as it passed over his gills. His broad neck rose and fell as the two small flaps danced to the beat of his breath. The bacteria within the iris of his vast eyes complemented the smooth, silvery skin that graduated to a smoky grey at the top of his head. His large eyes rested on an almost featureless face, two small slits in the place of a nose above pale and colourless lips. White scars were meticulously etched into his body that appeared to pour from an agonising bite mark on his shoulder. His veins protruded between the scars on his arms and neck as his hairless skin strained to retain the bulk of his muscle. As he reached the mountain, he pulled his broad shoulders back and his chest taut as he took a deep breath of the fresh waters. His bulky tail, enormous flukes, and the layers of elasticated skin that filled the gaps between his fingers made him perfectly adapted for life in the deep. He huddled into the contours of the seafloor as he swam through the mounds of rock at the base of the mountain, trying to stay as low as possible and avoid being seen. His skin brushed over the sponges beneath him, and small fish and crustaceans fled their homes as he passed. He paused as the rocky shelter grew thin and the seamount rose above him. He checked around him twice before looking for the mountain and sprinting to the sacred caves. The sacred caves had been carefully constructed over 2,000 years ago by his ancestors, the first mermen. Nico looked upon the caves in awe. He had heard of the cave drawings but had yet to see them. Carved into the walls were elaborate stories of marine life, hunts, and wary tales. Folk tales that forged the nursery rhymes forced upon his ears as a child. His eyes were drawn to the most magnificent. Thousands of flying squid of all sizes bannered the cave from one side to the other. Nico ran his hands along them and could feel the story being told purposefully with his fingers. Each individual had been intricately drawn, detailing the minutest of suckers on the smallest of tentacles. Only adoration could muster such attention to detail, and adoration it was that brought Nico's ancestors here every year, when the current was right, to observe the flying squid migration. Once a year, as the waters began to cool, thousands of flying squid would pass over the mountain's peak in search of warmer waters. All mermen would travel from Benthia across the treacherous plains to the sacred caves and wait eagerly for the first squid to soar above them. The first leading squid, the matriarch, guided her shoal in a beautiful display of harmony. The ancients believed the matriarch carried the knowledge of the oceans, passed down through the centuries to each new leader. They acted as a network, sharing information via the incredible exhibition of light through their skins, feeding the matriarch as their sole source of truth. The secrets of the ocean were secured in her brain, the vitality of life ran through her veins, and the strength of the oceans was harnessed in her heart. As the migration over the mountain proved too much for those on their last journey, the ancients would take them and care for them in their ultimate moments. Once the migration was over and those tired squid had finally come to rest, they would celebrate the life of the fallen. The squid's ink would be carefully removed and used to tattoo only the most celebrated tribesmen before returning the flesh and the spirit of the squid to the base of the mountain. Over centuries, this practice had been lost, as generations lost faith in their beliefs, and the journey to the mountains across the plains had become too dangerous. The worship of the squid turned to myth, and the power vested within the matriarch was all but forgotten. Nico turned his back to the intricate cave drawings and focused on the black waters above him, fixed in anticipation. He stayed for hours, wondering if the story was nothing but a tale. The matriarch flew across the mountain's peak in the flick of a fin. His eyes closed to all but a squint at her beaming brightness as she shone so intense that she scorched his misery. She was a bright white beacon of life, gracing all that she passed. As his eyes adjusted, she was followed by her shoal, and Benthia's darkness was momentarily lifted by the dazzling display of light that emanated from their bodies. It was just as his ancestors had drawn in the cave. They glided so effortlessly that Nico could be convinced they were still, if not for moving. In one swift movement, the matriarch flapped her wings before wrapping them tightly around her body. This appeared to set off a chain reaction, as a wave of motion passed through her shoal with a song of light that sang in perfect harmony all the notes of the ocean. This perfect synchronicity had led the ancients to worship the squid, for their connection and intelligence were unmatched. Nico cast his eyes straight to her. He crouched down, his palms pressed into the floor, fingers wide and arms extended. Just like a hermit crab carries his shell, Nico carried his shame with him everywhere he went. But his shame was too heavy, draining any good and leaving him feeling nothing but anger. If legends were to be believed, harnessing the matriarch's power would consume his shame and quench his thirst. In one smooth motion he jumped. His arms streamlined and his tail beat swiftly backwards and forwards. His heart and gills beat rapidly. He braced his core, ready to attack. Within a twinkling of her eye, he had her in his grasp. They spiraled through the water entwined, the migration shattered. In a panic, the squid began flashing with turmoil, filling the sea with a chaotic light display. The connection was broken. As she tried to escape, others came to her aid. They latched onto him, digging their hooks deep into his skin. With his arms wrapped around her, he could feel her panic as she struggled to breathe. She squirted her ink, covering Nico in a sticky black tar, and in desperation turned to fight. She wrapped all of her tentacles around Nico's arms, her hooks diving deep, her tentacles contracted, squeezing him with all her strength and ripping at his flesh. She wrapped one of her tentacles tight around Nico's gills. He gasped for breath. With his arms crushing her, he tightened his grip. Her body shone brighter, as if the light were to burst out of her, and her tentacles wrapped even harder around Nico's neck. The veins in his arms were bursting from his skin. Nico looked into her eyes as she almost consumed him. Adrenaline burst through his veins, powering his arms, and with the last of his strength, he gave one final crush to her body. All of the lights went out, and if possible, Benthia seemed darker than ever. With her tentacles loosely wrapped around his arm and the other squid scattered, Nico swam her dead and translucent body back to the caves. He lay her on the floor, stretched out in the middle of the cave. His arms now free, he stretched out his neck, ran his hand over his gills, and relished the pain as he witnessed the blood on his fingers. Her body was pure white, but her brightness had vanished. She lay motionless, and for a second he admired her beauty. The second was short-lived, and Nico ripped open her body with clawing hands. From the tentacles up through the body he tore apart her tissue, recklessly rupturing the ink sac. Once again Nico found himself floating in a sea of tar. He smeared the thick tarry ink from his eyes with the back of his forearm, smearing blood across his face, then shook the mangled squid's corpse in the water, the remnants of its innards casting off in murky ribbons. Without pause, he plunged his hands back into the gaping, twitching wreck of its body, tearing through the slick, ruined flesh in a desperate search. One large and two smaller hearts lay in the middle of her open body. As the large, rich purple heart twitched momentarily, he ripped it from her. Blood joined the tar-filled water around him, and he could taste the metallic mixture as it passed through his gills. This is it. The thought cracked through the static of his excited mind. The strength of the ocean. He held her heart in his hand and slowly took a bite. He swallowed the bite whole before savagely ripping at it, piece by piece, until nothing of her heart remained. He wiped his blood-stained mouth as he caught his breath, looked down at the undistinguishable carcass that now lay beneath him, and grinned. Her ancient blood coursed through his veins, and his muscles pulsed and shifted. His body, suddenly light and untethered, began to float upwards, propelled by an invisible force as if he had obtained her power of jet propulsion. His body began to shimmer and ripple before her light burst erratically from his skin in a troubled but dazzling display. His eyes, infused with her essence, pierced further into the darkness that bound him with an unimaginable clarity. As he steadied his breath, his thoughts were no longer shackled by the limits of merfolk understanding. The knowledge of all the seas had been torn from her and embedded in Nico's brain, and the strength of the ocean now lay within the most dangerous predator of all the ocean, and, for the moment, his hunger had been satisfied. The darkness slowly softened as the zooplankton returned from the surface to the deeper waters, bringing their light on their daily vertical migration. Now harnessing an unyielding power, Nico bounced and flipped across the mounds at the mountain's base, surfing the current into the plains. Pushing the limits of his speed, he spun with excitement until he came to a sudden halt. He found himself a snail's bubble away from a poisonous pufferfish spine and cautiously backed up. "You're pretty far from home," he said, intrigued as if expecting a response. It wasn't normal for a fish to be on its own in the expanse of the plains, but even more confusing, and much to Nico's dismay, the pufferfish didn't puff. "Brave little fella," he pondered, continuing to swim around him. As he did, the fish followed. Nico could feel him gliding along in his slipstream. "What a bold little beast," he mused, and began to grow increasingly annoyed that the little fish was seemingly fearless of him. Nico quickly spun around as if to attack the fish, but still the pufferfish didn't puff. Instead, he floated still, tilted slightly to his left side, and stared Nico straight in the eye, somewhat confused. Nico, now equally confused, stared back at the speckled square face of the little pufferfish. Tiny freckles filled the space between his eyes, which were much too far apart. Nico quickly darted off to try and get rid of the pest, but still the pufferfish followed. Nico stopped, dumbfounded that the little fish was so undeterred that he reached out and poked him right between the eyes. He must be broken, he thought. He stroked the little fish on the top of its head, down its spines, and headed home. The small fish followed behind him, being carried by Nico's slipstream. Although small, Nico began to appreciate the quiet company. He passed through the plains and over the dunes bordering the city and arrived at the reef's edge. He hated the city's outskirts, the fringes of the reef known as the communities, where the waters were stale and filthy and the people were needy. The coral in the communities were weak and dying, and scavenging creatures had begun colonizing the homes of impoverished mermen. The poverty sickened and disgusted him, and he always swam his fastest through these waters. At the centre of the reef was the royal palace. The palace was the largest and oldest cold-water coral structure on the sea floor. It stood unnoticed by no one and radiated all over Benthia. It was a glaring reminder to the destitute communities of the wealth and privilege of those in power. Over centuries, the palace had grown from a single polyp that settled in the scar of a meteorite impact to a magnificent structure that dominated high above the rest of the reef, bordered by an extraordinary rocky ridgeline that helped to keep enemies and peasants at bay. New coral polyps continued to build upon the calcium carbonate skeletons of their ancestors, weaving their way out of the darkness. The palace shone with a beautiful blue glow as the white coral reflected the celestial hibonite rock that littered the meteorite scar. The Brighteyes nurtured and tended to the coral. In return, they lived within its walls. Ginormous bones taken from the rib cages of blue whales protruded from the ridge's crest surrounding the palace. A dome of jellyfish circled the ridgeline, continuously weaving between the white whalebone and protecting the castle from above. But they were not just any jellyfish. These were box jellyfish, the most venomous in the ocean. One sting would have been fatal to even the strongest of mermen. Long, slender, hollow tentacles trailed lifelessly below their alien-like translucent bodies as they permanently calculated a kill. They often enticed fish and the occasional merman into their sting. As Nico approached the crest, the jellyfish parted almost instantly, allowing him passage. He swam through the void and into the palace grounds. The jellyfish reconvened behind him, lowering their veil, with one delighting on the flesh of the fearless pufferfish. The palace grounds thrived with life. The crisp crackle of snapping shrimp, scampering between rocks, filled the grounds with cheer as schools of orange snapper swam peacefully to their melody. A fever of devil rays circled the peak of the palace, occasionally dispersed by the passage of blunt-nosed six-gill sharks. A school of small fish parted way for an enormous groper that swam up to greet Nico as he made his way towards the palace entrance. The groper swam around him, butting his head against him until Nico patted it and stroked down his spine. The groper, thoroughly satisfied with Nico's acknowledgement, disappeared back through the school of fish. The entrance to the palace was blocked by an enormous giant clam. Its shell was as white as whalebone, almost hidden against the backdrop of the coral, if not for its neon blue tissue. Nico hovered over the top of the clam, and looking down upon its shell, the flesh was a mesmerizing pattern of shimmering blues speckled with hundreds of black blind eyes that interrogated Nico's shadow. It was easy for any merman to be drawn in by its colour, but only those worthy would be granted passage, and those not need be fast swimmers. As he impatiently waited to be granted entrance to the palace, the clam abruptly exhaled water through its siphon directly at Nico as if burping in his face. He was disgusted at the rotten fish odour that followed. As the siphon stopped reverberating, he caught a glimpse inside her shell at the pristine pearl atop her foot. He and his brother often attempted to get close enough to touch the pearl. They would compete and encourage each other to see who could get the closest before the clam closed shut on them. Nico had almost touched it once, but lost a small nick out of his tail for doing so. His brother Charlie was never so daring. The pearl enticed him still, but as she closed her shell, the entrance to the palace was revealed, and the pearl was locked away once more. Nico swam down behind her shell, which opened into a grand entrance hall that dazzled any eyes that fell upon it, except for his. He ignored how the hibonite blue minerals sparkled through a glaze of immaculately polished mother of pearl, how the light refracted through the translucent skins of the coral's fully extended tentacles, twinkling all around him as they waved in blissful contentment. How the water, filtered by thousands of small clams within the reef, subdued the bumps that covered his skin and relaxed his gills with the faint scent of ambergris. With complete disregard for the beauty of the palace, he swam upwards, towards the apex of the hall which led into the central branch of the palace. He continued up the long hallway which split into two corridors. One, guarded by a younger soldier, continued to the king's ascent. But as he slowed to pass the boy, his newly gifted hearing caught the faintest whispers coming from the corridor to his right, the great gallery. He thought to ignore them, nodded at the guard, and almost swam on, but dramatic waters were diffusing from the whispers. His curiosity had begotten him and carried him towards them. He sensed something was afin, for it wasn't the servants. They knew better than to be heard, particularly in the central chambers of the palace. The whispers grew louder with panic as he neared. He dropped his head and followed the sound further into the gallery. The whispers broke as an all too self-righteous voice beat at the inners of his ears. Even from a distant mumble, he recognised that beating instantly as the pompous tones of his elder brother Charlie, the King of Benthia. A lifetime of enduring his patronising voice had burned it into his memory, and the whisper of a king was too tempting to ignore. He slowed as he approached the passage to the second chamber. He came to a halt with a giant, slow tail swoop. He pressed his ear against the coral, which carried the sounds much clearer than the waters. It was almost as if they were relaying the information themselves. "Let me show you," said a deep and husky female voice. "Your Highness, this is outrageous. I cannot stand by and let this vile sorceress taint you with her wicked rituals," the voice protested, shrill and indignant. "I need to see it for myself, Councillor Longnose," said the king sternly. "Okay, go ahead." Within the palace the veil grows thin. Let waters speak where merfolk swim. Reveal the realms beyond this space. Through liquid glass show us the place. That tides twist through time's decree. Bring forth the sight seers can see. Pools of vision bound by magic. Unfold the truth, serene or tragic. A flurry of gasps dispersed through the coral, hitting Nico's ear before falling deathly silent. "It's too late, Your Majesty." Councillor Longnose struggled to catch his breath. "The migration has been disrupted. The matriarch has been murdered," he cried. "Do we have any idea who did this?" asked Charlie. "A few names are circulating the council. There is one name." Nico held his breath as the man paused. "But we can't be sure, Your Majesty," Councillor Longnose replied, and Nico sighed with relief. "There is a way," the witch interjected. "A squid's memory is never truly lost. They share their deepest, darkest memories with each other. We may be able to access them using the brains of another squid. A memory as traumatic as this is sure to have some remnants." "You want to fix the problem by killing more of its kind? You're mad!" Councillor Longnose's pitch had increased considerably. "Your Majesty, I must protest. I have seen enough. You can't continue to take counsel from this pernicious witch." "Calm down, Longnose. Our people are struggling. Food is scarce and the coral is dying. Benthia can't sustain us anymore. Added to that, the disruption has prevented the squid from moving on. They'll be frantic and looming in the shadows, desperate for food until the moon is right to carry them on. It is only a matter of time before they turn to prey on us, on our children. I need to know who did this," replied Charlie. "I understand your concerns, Your Majesty. I would do anything to keep my family safe, but the help of the witch will come at a cost that I fear is a far greater threat." The sea witch's enchanting voice resounded, passing through Councillor Longnose's determined exclusion of her. "The heart of the squid contains unyielding power. Whoever did this has, unbeknownst to them, set off a spiral of self-destruction. You see, the power needs energy. An inordinate amount of energy is sourced from the thousands of squid in the migration. As the powers take hold in their new body, they drain their life force. No merman can harness them without sacrificing himself. They will become stronger, smarter and faster for a short period until the sea witch trailed off. Until there is nothing left, Charlie finished. They will yield extraordinary power, but at a grave cost, said the witch. Why would someone do such a thing? Charlie asked. Fear, replied the witch, now talking directly to Councillor Longnose. The more we fear, the more narrow-minded we become, unable to see beyond our own long, slimy noses. She ran her finger down the length of Councillor Longnose's nose, tapped the end of it and swam around him. Focusing on what we fear in a stubborn foolishness will ultimately cause us to buckle under a strain of panic, broken by an irrational fixation. She stood at the end of his nose and stared deep into his eyes. He immediately broke her stare. Your Majesty, interrupted another voice, the gravitas of which ceased the tension in the chamber. Let us focus on the immediate issue at hand. The squid pose a threat to our people, and we need to do something to help them move on. We are already short of food, and we can't sustain them here. Crab yields are down, fish stocks are barely sustainable, and we're already having to consider venturing shallower for food. People are starving in the communities. Move on, the witch laughed. They won't just move on. Thousands of years of conditioned migration have broken, and you suspect they will just move on. They move with forces we cannot control, the current, the moon, and the tides. There may not be a window for them for weeks, said the witch. People will starve, chimed Councillor Longnose. We will handle it until then. In the meantime, we will ration food and send the soldiers out to new waters. Whoever did this hasn't caused food shortages, but exacerbated the problem. It's time we found new places to farm and forage, Charlie replied. Your Majesty, the squid pose a direct threat to the people. At night they will hunt and they will attack anyone in their path, the deep voice replied apathetically. I will inform the people. We will limit any movements at night. I want the people on guard, for I fear there is a bigger monster amongst us, said Charlie. There was an eerie silence in the room. You can go, Charlie said sternly, and please, undo your magic. I don't want to be staring at that atrocity all day. Nico pushed himself from the coral and sprinted back down the great gallery. He quickly turned into the next chamber as his brother's councillors appeared. Nico backed up the narrow passage until he bumped into something solid. A clam blocked the entrance to this chamber. He tapped it with the flukes of his tail and it leisurely dropped its shell, allowing him entry. He shuffled past and the clam reopened its shell, sealing the passage to the chamber. Nico lay down on the floor as if the morning's events had depleted him of all hope. He stared at the ceiling and began processing the witch's words. In contemplation, he ran his hand over the smooth skin on his head, but as he lowered his arm, cuts and bruises appeared as if out of clear water. Deep, circular cuts spiralled up his right forearm inside the scratches from the tentacle's grasp. And now that he had noticed them, the pain ensued, and panic set in. They'll know it was me, he thought, whilst desperately trying to rub them off. They wouldn't budge, and as he rubbed them, the wounds began to release fresh blood into the water around him. He needed something to cover them, something to stop someone from noticing. He needed kelp. Kelp only grew in the waters at the surface. Gifted with the grace of sunlight, it was one of the most powerful healing medicines for merfolk's skin. It wasn't easy for someone to get hold of in the depths of Benthia, not even for a royal. There was only one person who could help him, the wettest fish in the ocean, his cousin Percy. Nico held the clam's shell ajar and peered through the small gap down the passageway. The clam began to cough under the strain, but the coast was clear, and Nico swam down the passageway towards the great gallery. He moved fast with agitated and nervous waters surrounding him. His eyes caught every slight movement of a coral polyp. He noticed the blood diffusing from his arms and quickly held them behind his back to hide them. He avoided eye contact with the guard in the king's corridor as he passed him and swam back down the central passage to the entrance hall. He waited before entering. A stout man emerged from one of the eastern lower chambers, the servants' quarters, carrying more scrolls than his arms could contain. He watched him carry them across the hall before disappearing up the western middle corridor. Nico took his moment and rushed down the opposite side of the palace, the eastern middle corridor. This corridor was narrower but extraordinarily clean, almost uninvitingly so for Nico. He continued to the end of the corridor until it split into two passages. He took the passage on the right and knocked firmly on the cockleshell door. Go away, Mum. I told you, Open up, it's Nico. The cockleshell dropped instantly, and out swam a small, dishevelled man, his arms wide in eager greeting. Percy, with his lanky limbs and an awkwardness that seemed almost charming, looked as though he'd just woken up from a restless nap. His slightly gangly frame was complemented by a wild mop of translucent fins flowing from his head, unruly and unkempt. Sprouting barbels on either side of his mouth, not yet fully grown, quivered slightly with excitement as his bright blue eyes sparkled with an innocent enthusiasm. Despite his slightly dishevelled appearance, there was a youthful energy about Percy that was hard to ignore, as if the mere sight of his cousin filled him with boundless joy. Nico entered the room without acknowledging him and turned around to ensure the door was closed. I need kelp. Do you have any? He asked, still hiding his arms behind his back. Why, what's up? Percy questioned. Have you got any? Growled Nico, his patience thinning. Kelp is tough to come by, Nico, and we only use it in emergencies. What do you need it for? Have you got any? Nico's voice grew heavier with each word. Sweat began to form on his forehead, and his skin started to turn a dark shade of blue. His arms stayed firmly behind his back. Percy began searching through the crevices in the coral of his chamber, which appeared full of sponges, seaweeds, algae, and all kinds of medical supplies, but no kelp. I don't, but there is some in the doctor's chamber. I can try and get some for you. What's going on, Nico? He said as he fumbled to find his medical supplies. Nothing. It's nothing. I wasn't paying attention during my morning swim. Scraped my arms across an urchin bed. The lie effortlessly glided out of Nico's mouth. You should be more careful. Urchins can be terribly poisonous, said Percy. Nico clenched his jaw. Right. Okay. Well, I know. I have some cucumber skin somewhere. It's not as effective as kelp, but it will stop anything from getting infected. Give me a sec. Percy held out the sea cucumber skin for Nico, and Nico hesitated to take it. If he was quick, maybe Percy wouldn't notice the squid's markings that covered his arms. Nico stared Percy in the eye as he went to take the roll of green skin. Percy's eyes broke contact with Nico's, and with a swoop of his tail, Nico pinned Percy to the wall of coral behind him. Percy's eyes traced the markings on Nico's arms before he looked back at Nico's bright blue eyes. His mouth was wide open and his gills contracted rapidly. You said you scraped your arm on an urchin, he choked. What are you saying? Said Nico, as his grip tightened and he pushed Percy harder into the coral. Percy winced as parts of the coral dug into his skin, his eyes discovering more and more truth from the markings on Nico's arms. Nothing, it's just they look like... It looks like I stumbled and swam into an urchin bed. Nico's hands squeezed even tighter. Yes, exactly, said Percy, now struggling for breath. You don't mention this to anybody. Nico's voice resonated from the darkest part of his chest. No, of course. Percy's voice was now all but a whisper. Nico pushed Percy even harder into the wall behind him and let go. He took the sea cucumber skin from Percy's jittering hand and began wrapping the skin up his right arm. Nico covered his hands in the sticky mucus that coated the cucumber skins and acted as an adhesive on his skin. The slime had a cooling effect on his cuts, while the cucumber skin provided protection. The room was silent as Nico wrapped his arm and tucked the skin under itself to tie it off. Thanks, said Nico begrudgingly, and with that he swam towards the door. As the cockle slowly closed its shell for Nico to leave, he turned back to Percy. Nobody. Percy nodded solemnly, and Nico left Percy's chamber and swam back towards the hall. As he swam through the grand hall, a sliver of a merman approached him with an over-exaggerated sense of urgency. Your Highness, your brother, he's looking for you. What does he want? Nico's heart dropped and his stomach began to churn. I'm not sure, sir, but he said it was urgent. the small man said in trepidation. It always is with him, Nico quipped, trying to make the man feel more at ease. Dread filled his veins. His mind raced, but through the fog of his thoughts he found himself at the door to the king's office. Without knocking, the door opened. Come in, Nico. The room was a striking yet practical space, designed for quiet contemplation and governance. The coral walls curved into an almost perfect oval shape, glowing faintly with intricate patterns that mirrored the currents of the ocean. The pale blue and white hues of the coral gave the room an ethereal ambience, accentuated by the ever-present hum of the palace's filtration system, the siphons of the clams. Embedded along the walls were shelves filled with scrolls and artifacts, all carefully arranged, reflecting Charlie's thoughtful and ordered nature. Tiny fanworms and feather stars peeped from crevices, adding subtle movements of life to the otherwise still environment. At the centre of the room stood a desk carved from radiant red coral, sturdy and ornate, its surface strewn with scrolls and tools of a scholar. Sat at the desk was his brother, Charlie, with a polished pot of cuttlefish ink sat beside a feather star quill, its delicate tendrils floating slightly in the water as he finished reading a scroll. Behind Charlie, a large circular window framed the vibrant reef outside, offering a calming view of the bustling palace grounds. The faint blue light of the jellyfish dome occasionally cast shimmering patterns across the room, adding a sense of rhythm to its tranquility. Charlie remained seated, pushed his glasses up his slight nose, and continued flicking through one of the many scrolls on his desk. Charlie was far-sighted and always had to wear his glasses to read. His father had made him a pair of reading glasses from glass bottles that had fallen from the surface when he was a child. They were far too small for him now, but he needed them nonetheless. "What have you done to your arms?" he asked without looking up from his desk. Nico's stomach dropped. "I stumbled into an urchin bed on my morning swim. Nothing major," he said confidently, but not without extreme stress. Charlie looked up from his work and took off his glasses. Charlie and Nico were dissimilar in all ways except the brilliance of their eyes. Charlie's eyes were a glowing green of sun-kissed reef anemones, as piercing as their tentacles sting. His eyes were complemented by a sombre glow to his skin. He was grey-skinned like Nico, but carried a subtle orange undertone that seemed to intensify under the bioluminescent glow of the hibonite rocks embedded in the walls. Charlie's frown deepened. He examined Nico's sea cucumber patchwork before putting his glasses back, dipped his feather star quill into his cuttlefish ink, and continued with his work. "Well, that was silly," Charlie scorned. "Your messenger said you wanted to see me," said Nico abruptly. "Yes. Benthia is no longer safe, and you are to stay within the palace grounds until further notice," he said, still looking down at his work. "Not safe?" Nico's voice almost broke. "That's what I said." "I'm not staying within the grounds," Nico replied. Charlie's pen stopped. He looked up at his brother and slowly stood up from his desk. Charlie was much more slender than Nico, and by comparison looked almost too skinny. Charlie was only a catfish's whisker shorter, but he had never gotten over it. Growing was one of the things Nico was better at, and everything was a competition. "We can't. The hunt is tomorrow night," Nico exclaimed. "Yes, the hunt will go ahead. Our people need the food, but otherwise it's too dangerous. The squid haven't made the migration. They are stuck here, restless and hungry. You could be attacked." "What?" Nico laughed. "I'm being serious. What are you laughing at?" Charlie put his hands down on the desk. Nico went silent. "We will take extra soldiers for the hunt, but after that you cannot leave the palace grounds. I will increase security." "This is dolphin dung. I'm not scared of a squid." "Well, you should be, and you're an idiot if you think you could outsmart them. They're brilliant creatures," said Charlie plainly. Nico's anger grew. He couldn't retaliate by saying he had defeated one, or his brother would indeed have him arrested. Unable to express himself, he replied in the only way he knew how: to attack. "You're a coward. What sort of king shies away from a threat? You never did have it in you to be a true king," roared Nico. In many ways, Nico was right. Charlie didn't have the physical strength of his father, not like Nico, but Charlie had the intelligence of their mother. Strength comes in many forms, Niccolo. That's what weak people say, exclaimed Nico. I didn't call you here for an argument, but my orders are final. Your orders? Nico laughed. You have no power over me, Charlie. Nico scoffed as he turned his back to his brother. Nico, remember, I am not just your brother, I am the king. You know, you've always thought you were the boss of me, even when we were kids growing up. I didn't listen to you then, and I'm sure as a shark's bite not listening to you now. You're not my king. We may be related by blood, but you're not my brother. You're nothing more to me than the barnacles that cling to the tail fins of peasants. Nico stormed off down the hallway, his mind exploding in anger. Nico! Charlie's heart sank to the deepest part of his chest as the last memories of his little brother were shattered into a million pieces. Nico knew his brother only too well not to underestimate his conviction. After the hunt, Nico would be bound to the palace. This was just the beginning of his brother's rule. Charlie's authority would forever bind him. He despised the thought of being under the command of his weaker, foolish brother, especially now Nico had harnessed the strength of the ocean. And if his time was limited, no one would get in his way. Nico couldn't escape his thoughts as they ventured into uncharted territory. He didn't want to be here, but there was no other way. Nico was hungry, and as his thoughts spiraled into darkness, the bright blue of his eyes became shadowed. Well, that brings us to the end of chapter 1. And so thank you if you've managed to stay with me throughout the whole chapter. As I said, I'm no professional reader, and so apologies I had a few stumbles in there. I've never actually found it so hard to say the word cucumber. I would love to know if you've enjoyed the story so far. I know it's only one chapter, but any feedback is good feedback. So please like or comment on the video, or even share it with a friend if you think they might be interested. I am considering doing more of these chapter reads, so let me know in the comments if you would like to hear chapter 2. But if you do want to know what happens next, the book is also available on Amazon. Just search for Archie Widemouth and it should come up. Alternatively, you can go to widemouthbooks.com and check out my website. The link should be below, where you can learn a bit more about why I wrote the book, and it has a link to the book on there too. So thank you again for listening to my story, and I hope you enjoyed it as much as I have enjoyed creating it.